So welcome to this talk. My name is Alexander Bell, and this talk is entitled The Purity of Your Heart. So if you say to God, or any other name that you like to call God, whether it's the Creator, the universe, the Source, the Supreme Being, but if you say to that divine intelligence of loving consciousness, if you say, I don't want my ego anymore, I want to be a vessel of your pure love instead, then do you know what will happen? The personality of Christ will slowly begin to replace the personality of your ego. Ego thoughts will be replaced by more selfless and compassionate thoughts, and you will experience yourself more as God's child, with God's mind, which is the same as Christ's mind. So essentially, the false you will be replaced with the real you. You will stop thinking of yourself as separate from God. Your sense of identity will be tied to Christ, because the light of Christ has occupied your heart and your mind. Will this make you more Christ-like? In a sense, yes, as your entire being will be infused and permeated by his radiant light. It will obviously not make you Jesus himself, but it will make you an embodiment of Jesus' love, which is actually what you were designed for, irrespective of whether you are male or female, or whether you even believe in Christ or not. So which would you rather have? Your ego and all of its conflicting and complicated thoughts, or the mind of Christ, filled with his beautiful light? Because you have the choice, just like I had. Long ago I chose the mind of Christ, and have been patiently unpicking the tendrils of the ego from my being ever since. Eventually, you will come to the final tendrils, the more deeply conditioned ego desires for something other than God's will. Our total and complete surrender to God's will means the end of the ego, which means the end of fear also. The ego has nothing left to cling on to, because it only holds on to you with the desires that it places in your heart. These are like its roots, which give the ego a foothold in your being. They make you desire things other than union with God, and thus union with God does not occur, and you remain yoked to the ego. Eliminating ego desires is how you loosen its roots, and when they are gone, and simply doing God's will is your only desire, then the shadow of the ego simply falls away from you, and you join with God. What remains in you is the light of Christ. Now I know this only because I've undergone this process myself. And I'm not telling you this in order to feed my ego, because that's the last thing I want to do, but rather to inform you that you can do the same. And there is no downside, no drawback, no sacrifice needed, except the ego. And trust me, if there's anything that needs to be sacrificed in this world, it is the ego. Lay it on God's altar and ask him to terminate it, because he certainly will, and you will never, ever regret saying goodbye to it. Really, it could not be simpler, but it does require your heartfelt determination that this is what you really want. Because if there is any doubt, you will not be able to lay your ego on the altar, because all doubt comes from the ego itself. Doubt is the ego's way of holding on to you and keeping itself alive. The ego is a parasite which feeds upon our negative emotions. Essentially, our ego feeds us with negative thoughts in order to create the negative emotions which it needs to sustain itself. And so, if there are no negative emotions, then the ego has no food, and it will lose its grip on your heart. The sooner you are free from the controlling grip of the ego, the happier, more inspired, and more fulfilled you will be, guaranteed. Now, of course, the ego is also capable of giving us positive thoughts and emotions as well. And it does this intentionally in order to keep us captive in its realm. Because if all it offered us was negative thoughts and emotions, then we would seek to rid ourselves of its influence much sooner. And of course, the ego will give you plenty of thoughts about what I am telling you now. And you can get involved in those thoughts if you want to. but they will only keep you tangled up in the ego's conceptual world. However, if you pay attention to your heart, you will notice it resonating with the truth of what I am saying, and it will encourage you to act upon them. All you need to do is turn your attention away from your own reflective and analytical thinking and speak to God as if he was right next to you, listening to every word. Because in fact, he is. Tell him that you want him to perform ego surgery on you and free you from its poisonous and controlling grip. How does God perform ego surgery? He uses the light of Christ, which is God's only tool that he needs to go into the deepest recesses of our heart and transform the darkness which exists in those places, the fear, the pain. Christ is the tool, God's favourite tool, the only tool he needs to transform our heart, to heal our heart from all darkness. God will do this if it is genuinely what you want in your heart. But be fully aware that it means following his plan for your life rather than your own. Naturally, God will use all the gifts, skills and passions he has blessed you with in order to make a difference to other people's lives, and he will do this in ways you could never have imagined. Following God's plan is by far the greatest adventure you can possibly have in life, and there is nothing stopping you embarking on that adventure right now, except a few doubts and fears perhaps. But they belong to the ego, and if you lay it on God's altar, they will hinder you no more. It is time to take our attention away from our self-obsession and turn it towards God. We do this simply by talking to him, thanking him, asking him to purify our heart and make us a more loving person. These are among the most powerful prayers you can utter. And when God hears your genuine desire to be a more loving and pure-hearted person, he acts instantly and powerfully in ways we cannot comprehend. As our heart is purified, which essentially means that our desires are purified and they become less selfish, then we move more into the light, closer to God, more into the divine realms of awareness. Our heart becomes more full of love, more joyful, more free and more compassionate. We begin to understand that the true mystery of life revolves around the purity of our heart and the desires that we allow to take root there. The ego is constantly persuading us to want things that lead us towards temporary material satisfaction, rather than sustained spiritual fulfillment. And in the process, our heart grows cold from a lack of spiritual connection, and we forget how vital it is to nurture this connection. We become addicted to worldly pleasures and experiences, forgetting the incomparable beauty and joy of a heart which is close to God. And so, to conclude, we simply need to turn our mind away from the worldly and towards the spiritual beauty of God. Ask him to purify your heart on a daily basis, whenever you remember to do so. Ask him to make you a more loving, tolerant, and forgiving person. Ask him to give you greater humility, and you will discover that life changes very rapidly as your heart changes too. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. So thank you for listening to this talk. You can download my free book, which is called How to Live in Love, and that's available on my website, which is alexanderbell.org. And you can also find all of the healing music that I've composed of the past 25 years, also available for free, and hundreds of my articles, lots of other music as well, lots of different things to help you heal and to grow in love and to grow in faith and to let go of fear, control and anger. And that's all at alexanderbell.org. So thank you for listening. I wish you well, and God bless you.